The train's whistle cut through the dry prairie air like a promise about to be broken, and Kade Morrison stood on the weathered platform clutching a photograph of a woman he would never see again. Steam hissed around the iron wheels as the locomotive shuddered to a halt at the tiny station, nothing more than a raised platform and a windbreak against the endless grassland wind. He straightened his vest, ran one calloused hand through sun-bleached hair, and watched the doors. 3 passengers stepped down. An elderly rancher he recognized from 2 counties over, a traveling salesman with his heavy case, and then her. Not Eleanor Whitmore of Boston with her pale skin and carefully curled hair from the photograph. An orc woman, jade-green skin catching the afternoon light, small tusks just visible when she turned her head to look uncertainly at the platform. She wore a simple gray dress that had seen better days, and in her arms she carried a child, perhaps 3 years old, his small hands clutching at her shoulder. The boy had the same green skin, the same pointed ears, and he was fast asleep despite the noise of the train. Kade's stomach dropped somewhere around his boots. 3 months of letters, carefully saved money for her train ticket, plans sketched out in the evenings after endless days of watching his cattle grow thinner and his water reserves shrink lower. All of it had hinged on Eleanor arriving, on the arrangement they had made, on her share of capital to help him through the drought until the rains returned. The orc woman stood alone on the platform as the other passengers moved past her. She shifted the child's weight in her arms and looked around with an expression that bordered on desperation, her dark eyes scanning the empty prairie that stretched in every direction. The train gave a warning whistle, preparing to depart. "Miss Whitmore." Kade called out, knowing even as he said it that this woman was not Eleanor, could not be Eleanor, but needing some kind of answer. The orc woman turned sharply at the name, her pointed ears flicking slightly. She approached him slowly, her movements careful, almost apologetic. "You are Kade Morrison." Her voice was lower than he had expected, with a slight accent that softened the edges of her words. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the dust on her dress from long travel, the way she held the sleeping child as if he was the only thing keeping her upright. "I am," he said, and waited. "Eleanor Whitmore paid my fare," the orc woman said, each word coming out deliberate and precise, as if she had practiced this speech during the long journey. "She paid for my ticket and gave me her papers, and she told me to come here in her place. She said you needed someone, anyone, and that I needed somewhere to go. She said perhaps we could make an arrangement that would suit us both." Kade stared at her. Behind them, the train was already pulling away, gathering speed as it headed toward the next distant station. The sound of it faded into the vast silence of the prairie. "She just left, took the money and left. She said she had changed her mind about frontier life," the orc woman said quietly. "She said she met someone in Omaha, someone with an established business, and she could not go through with coming here. She said you would understand, that everyone makes choices about their own future." "My future was counting on her share of the investment," Kade said, hearing the bitterness in his own voice. He took off his hat and ran his hand through his hair, suddenly aware that he was being rude, that this woman had not asked for any of this either. "I am sorry. That was not directed at you." "What is your name?" "Orla Haskin," she said. She adjusted the child again, and Kade could see how her arms were trembling with the effort of holding him for so long. "This is my nephew, Tiabin. His parents died last winter, sickness, and I have been caring for him since. We were living in a work camp near the rail yards, but the foreman said I had to leave. He said they did not want children there, that they were bad luck. I had nowhere else to go. When Eleanor offered to pay my fare if I took her place, I thought perhaps it was a chance." The wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning across the empty platform. Kade looked at this woman, this stranger who had stepped off a train with nothing but a sleeping child and a desperate hope, and he thought about his own desperation, about the cattle that needed feeding and the wells running dry and the debts that would not wait. The arrangement was that Eleanor would contribute $300 to help stabilize my ranch through the drought, he said slowly. In exchange, she would have a home here, a partnership in building something lasting, and eventually marriage if we suited each other. That was what we agreed to in our letters. Orla's expression did not change, but he saw something flicker in her dark eyes, not quite hope, but not quite resignation either. I do not have $300. I do not have $3. I have what I am wearing and what Tiabin is wearing, and Eleanor's papers with your name and address. That is all. Kade looked past her toward the road that led back to his homestead, 5 miles of rutted track through brown grass and failing pasture. He thought about the empty house, about the plans he had made, about the cattle that would die if the drought continued, and he could not afford to bring in feed or dig deeper wells. "Can you work?" he asked finally. "I can work very hard," Orla said immediately. "I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals, work a garden. I can do laundry and preserve food and manage a household. I worked on a farm before, years ago, before the war pushed my people north. I am strong and I learn quickly, and I will earn my keep and Tiabin's too. I promise you that." Tiabin stirred in her arms, making a small sound. Orla immediately began to sway gently, soothing him back to sleep with practiced ease. The gesture was so natural, so tender, that Kade felt something shift in his chest. "The homestead is not much right now," he said. "The drought has been hard. I have 60 head of cattle, down from 100 last spring. Water is scarce, feed is expensive, and I have been running this place alone for 2 years since my father died. The house is solid, but it needs a woman's touch, needs someone to make it a home instead of just a place to sleep between work. The original arrangement was for a business partnership as much as anything else, a way to pool resources and build something worth having. I do not have resources to pool anymore, but I still need the help, and it sounds like you need a place to be." "I do," Orla said, and the honesty in her voice was almost painful. "More than anything, Tiabin needs a place where he can be safe and grow up away from people who look at him like he is a burden or a threat. I would work every hour I am awake to give him that." Kade made a decision that was probably foolish but felt inevitable. "Come back to the homestead. Stay for a trial period, let us say 2 months. You and Tiabin can have the spare room, you will help with the household work and anything else I need, and I will provide room and board. At the end of 2 months, we decide if this arrangement works for both of us. If it does, we talk about something more permanent. If it does not, I will pay your fare to wherever you want to go and give you enough to start over. That seems fair to both of us." Orla's eyes widened slightly, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. "That is more than fair. That is generous." "I accept, Mr. Morrison, and I will not make you regret it. Call me Kade," he said, and reached out to take Tiabin from her arms. The boy weighed almost nothing, a small warm bundle that barely stirred as Kade settled him against his shoulder. Orla's arms dropped to her sides, and he saw the relief in her face as the weight lifted. "My wagon is over here. It is a rough ride back to the homestead, but Tiabin can sleep in the bed of it." They walked across the platform together, and Kade tried not to think about how completely different this was from every plan he had made. Orla climbed up into the wagon seat with quiet efficiency while he settled Tiabin in the back on a blanket. Then he climbed up beside her and took the reins. The horses knew the way home, and Kade let them set their own pace. Beside him, Orla sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking out at the endless prairie with an unreadable expression. "Tell me about the drought," she said after a while. "How long has it been?" 18 months, Kade said. The first summer was bad but manageable. Last winter the snowfall was half what it should have been, and this spring the rains never came. The grass is dying, the water table is dropping, and the cattle are suffering. I have been selling off stock just to afford feed for the rest, trying to keep the breeding pairs and the younger animals alive until the weather breaks. If I can hold on until next spring, I can rebuild. If not, you lose everything, Orla finished quietly. Yes. They rode in silence for a while. The sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon, painting the dry grass in shades of gold and amber. In the distance, Kade could see the first fence line of his property, the posts standing like sentinels against the empty land. "I do not know much about cattle," Orla said, "but I know about surviving when resources are scarce. In the work camp, we learned to make things stretch, to use every bit of what we had. Perhaps some of that knowledge will be useful here." "Perhaps," Kade said, and felt a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. The homestead came into view as they crested a low rise. A sturdy house built of prairie stone with a shake roof, a barn that leaned slightly to one side but was still sound, a windmill that turned slowly in the constant breeze, and corrals that held thin cattle clustered around water troughs. It was not impressive, not by any measure, but it was home, and Kade had worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep it. Orla looked at it all with careful attention, her dark eyes taking in every detail. "The house is good," she said. "Strong bones. The barn needs repair work, but nothing that cannot be fixed. The cattle are thin, but they are on their feet, which means they can recover. You have kept them alive through the worst of it. That takes skill and determination." "It has taken every hour I have," Kade admitted. He pulled the wagon up in front of the house and set the brake. Tiabin was awake now, blinking sleepy eyes and looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Let me show you inside." The house was clean but sparse, functional rather than comfortable. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 doors led off to bedrooms, and a ladder led up to a loft space used for storage. Kade had not bothered with decorations or anything beyond the essential furniture, and seeing it through Orla's eyes made him realize just how stark it was. "The spare room is through there," he said, pointing to the left-hand door. "It has a bed and a dresser, not much else. I have been using it for storage, but I can clear that out. There is a pump in the kitchen for water, the privy is out back, and I have a bathing room off the kitchen for washing up. It is not fancy, but it is solid." Orla set Tiabin down, and the boy immediately grabbed her skirt, hiding partially behind her as he peeked out at Kade. "It is a good home," she said firmly. "Better than anything I hoped for when I got on that train. Thank you for giving us a chance." "Thank you for being willing to work," Kade said. He felt awkward suddenly, unsure of what to do with his hands or where to look. This woman was a stranger, and yet she was going to be living in his house, sharing his space, becoming part of his daily life. "Are you hungry?" "I can make something simple for dinner." "Let me," Orla said immediately. "You said I would help with household work, so let me start now. Show me where things are, and I will make us a meal while you do whatever evening chores need doing." They worked out the logistics quickly. Kade showed her the pantry, the root cellar, the basics of the kitchen. Orla absorbed it all with quiet efficiency, already opening cupboards and assessing what was available. Tiabin stayed close to her, watching Kade with wide, uncertain eyes. Kade headed out to tend the cattle, checking water levels and spreading what feed he could afford. The evening chores were routine by now, burned into his muscles by repetition, but his mind kept drifting back to the house, to the orc woman in his kitchen, to the enormous gamble he had just taken. When he returned an hour later, full darkness settling over the prairie, the house glowed with lamplight and the smell of cooking food. Orla had made a stew from dried beef and vegetables, thick and savory, and there were biscuits cooling on the counter. The table was set for 3, including a careful arrangement of cushions on one chair so that Tiabin could sit at proper height. They ate together in near silence, the awkwardness of strangers trying to share space. Tiabin was shy, eating in small, careful bites and never taking his eyes off Kade. Orla ate with the focused intensity of someone who had not had a proper meal in a while, and Kade found himself eating more than he usually did, drawn in by food that actually tasted like someone had cared about preparing it. "This is very good," he said finally. "Better than anything I have made in months." Orla's small tusks showed briefly as she smiled. "My mother taught me that food is how you show care for people. Even when you have little, you can make it taste like plenty if you put thought into it." After dinner, Kade cleared out the spare room while Orla washed dishes. He moved boxes of old tools and spare tack into the barn, swept the floor, and made sure the window opened properly to let in fresh air. It was not much, but it was private space, and he made it as welcoming as he could. Orla put Tiabin to bed with quiet songs in a language Kade did not understand, then emerged from the room looking exhausted. "He is asleep," she said softly. "He has been so brave through all of this, but he is just a little boy. He needs stability more than anything else." "He will have it here," Kade said, and surprised himself with how much he meant it. "This place might be struggling, but it is solid, and I keep my promises. If I say you and Tiabin can stay, then you can stay." Orla looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this? You could have turned me away at the station, told me this was not your problem. Many men would have." Kade leaned against the door frame, considering his words. "My father used to say that character is what you do when circumstances do not go your way. Anyone can be decent when everything is easy. It is when things go wrong that you find out who you really are. Eleanor leaving like that, sending you instead, it was not what I planned. But you are here, and you need help, and I need help, and sometimes the best you can do is make the most of what you actually have instead of mourning what you expected. Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was a good man," Kade said. "He built this place from nothing, and he taught me that land and cattle and buildings do not matter nearly as much as keeping your word and treating people with basic decency. I am trying to live up to that." Orla nodded slowly. "Then we have that in common. My mother taught me similar things before the war took everything. I will do my best to prove that your decency was not misplaced." They said goodnight awkwardly, retreating to their separate rooms. Kade lay awake for a long time, listening to the house settle around him, thinking about the green-skinned woman sleeping in his spare room and the choices that had brought them both to this moment. The days fell into a pattern after that. Kade rose before dawn to tend the cattle and manage the endless work of keeping a failing ranch alive. Orla rose with him, making breakfast and packing food for midday, then spending her day cleaning, mending, organizing, and transforming the Stark house into something that felt lived in. Tiabin followed her everywhere at first, shy and silent, but gradually he began to explore, to play in the yard, to watch Kade with cautious interest. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Orla proved to be exactly what she had promised, a tireless worker who approached every task with quiet competence. She mended clothes Kade had been meaning to fix for months, reorganized the pantry so that supplies were easier to track, planted a late-season garden in a sunny patch near the house, and coaxed struggling vegetables to life with careful watering and constant attention. She learned the rhythms of the ranch quickly, anticipating what Kade would need before he asked for it. More than that, she made the house feel like a home. There were wildflowers in a jar on the table, curtains in the windows that she had sewn from old fabric, the smell of bread baking and meals prepared with care. When Kade came in from work, dusty and exhausted, there was hot water for washing and hot food for eating and someone to talk to who actually listened. They talked in the evenings after Tiabin went to bed, sitting at the kitchen table over coffee or on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie. Orla told him about her childhood on a farm in the border territories, about her family's displacement during the war, about the years of drifting from place to place, trying to find somewhere that would let orcs settle peacefully. Kade told her about his father's dream of building something lasting, about the hard years of establishing the ranch, about the loneliness of the past 2 years working alone. "I never thought I would do a mail-order arrangement," Kade admitted one evening. "It felt like giving up somehow, admitting I could not find someone the normal way. But the nearest town is 15 miles off, and I am out here alone most of the time, and I am not good at the social things that lead to courtship. Letters seemed easier." "They are easier," Orla agreed. "You can think about what you want to say, take time to find the right words. Face-to-face is harder. You have to react in the moment, and sometimes the right words do not come until later." "You are good at it, though," Kade said. "Talking, I mean. You always seem to know what to say." Orla laughed, a warm sound that Kade had come to treasure. "I am terrified most of the time that I will say the wrong thing. I just hide it well." "You hide it very well," Kade said, and their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them that neither was quite ready to name. The drought dragged on through late summer into early autumn. The grass stayed brown, the water levels kept dropping, and Kade made the hard decision to sell another 10 head of cattle just to keep the remaining animals fed. It hurt every time, watching part of his herd driven away, knowing that each sale was another piece of his father's dream diminishing. Orla found him in the barn after one such sale, sitting on a hay bale with his head in his hands. She did not say anything at first, just sat down beside him and waited. "I am losing it," Kade said finally. "Everything my father built, everything I have worked for, it is slipping away piece by piece, and I cannot stop it." "You are keeping it alive," Orla said firmly. "Your father built this place, but you are the one fighting to preserve it through impossible circumstances. That takes just as much courage as building it in the first place. Maybe more. It does not feel like courage, it feels like failure." Orla was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft but intense. "After my parents died and I took Tiabin, I had people tell me I should give him up, that I could not provide for a child, that I was selfish for trying. But I kept him anyway because he is family, and you do not abandon family even when circumstances are hard. Sometimes holding on is the bravest thing you can do. You are holding on, Kade. That matters." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not just the capable helper or the convenient solution to his household problems, but a woman who had faced her own losses and kept moving forward anyway. Her jade-green skin caught the dim light filtering through the barn slats, and her dark eyes were full of understanding, and he realized with sudden clarity that he cared about her, that she had become important to him in ways that went far beyond their initial arrangement. "I am glad you are here," he said quietly. "I know that is not how this started, and I know neither of us expected any of this, but I am glad it was you who stepped off that train." Orla's breath caught just slightly. "I am glad too, more than I can properly say." They sat together in the barn as the afternoon light faded, not touching but close enough that Kade could feel the warmth of her beside him, and something settled in his chest that had been restless for a very long time. The 2-month trial period ended without either of them mentioning it. Orla stayed, and Kade did not suggest she leave, and the arrangement that had begun as desperation gradually transformed into something that looked like partnership. Tiabin began to come out of his shell, playing in the yard and following Kade around, asking endless questions about the cattle and the horses and everything else. The boy was bright and curious, and Kade found himself enjoying the role of teacher, showing Tiabin how to feed the chickens Orla had acquired, how to recognize different types of grass, how to approach a horse safely. "He likes you," Orla said one evening, watching from the porch as Kade and Tiabin examined a beetle they had found near the water trough. "He is a good boy," Kade replied, "bright and eager to learn. You have done well with him." "We have done well with him," Orla corrected gently. "He talks about you constantly. You are the first stable man in his life, the first person beside me who has shown him consistent kindness. That means everything to him." Kade felt a lump in his throat. "He means a lot to me too, both of you do." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Orla looked at him steadily, and Kade saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes. Care that had deepened into affection, affection that was becoming something stronger. "Kade," she said softly, and he heard everything she was not quite saying in the way she spoke his name. "I know," he said. "I feel it too." They did not rush into anything. The affection between them grew slowly, carefully, built on shared work and shared evenings and the gradual accumulation of small moments. A hand brushed in passing. Smiles that lasted a heartbeat longer than necessary. Conversations that stretched late into the night because neither wanted them to end. Autumn deepened, and the first rains finally came. Not enough to break the drought, but enough to bring a touch of green back to the prairie grass, enough to fill the water troughs without constant pumping, enough to give hope that the worst might be over. Kade and Orla were in the kitchen preparing dinner when they heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Visitors were rare this far from town, and Kade went to the door with a frown. The wagon that pulled up was expensive, driven by a hired man, and the woman who climbed down from it wore a traveling suit that probably cost more than Kade made in 6 months. Eleanor Whitmore looked exactly like her photograph, pale and pretty with carefully arranged curls. She approached the house with a confident stride, and Kade felt Orla come up behind him, her presence a solid comfort at his back. "Mr. Morrison," Eleanor said with a bright smile, "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I have come to discuss our arrangement." "There is no arrangement," Kade said flatly. "You left someone else in your place and never came. That dissolved any agreement we had." Eleanor's smile tightened. "I understand you must be upset, but circumstances have changed. The man I met in Omaha turned out to be less established than he claimed. I am prepared now to honor our original agreement and take my place here as we discussed in our letters." Behind Kade, Orla made a small sound, quickly stifled. He did not turn around, keeping his eyes on Eleanor. "You gave up any claim to that agreement when you paid someone else to take your place and kept the travel money I sent. I do not know what you expected to find here, but the position is no longer available." Eleanor's eyes flicked past him to Orla, and her expression turned cold. "I see. You have replaced me with her. How novel. I assume you realize that people will talk, that taking up with an orc will ruin any standing you have in the county. My family has connections, Mr. Morrison. My uncle is a territorial judge. It would be very easy to make your life difficult if you refuse to honor our original agreement." Kade felt anger rise in his chest, hot and fierce. "Are you threatening me?" "I am explaining the situation," Eleanor said smoothly. "I invested time in our correspondence, and I have expectations based on that investment. I am willing to overlook your dalliance with the orc woman if you send her away and honor our arrangement. Otherwise, I will pursue recompense through legal channels. You sent me money for travel with the promise of marriage and a partnership in your ranch. That constitutes a binding agreement, and my uncle can make it very expensive for you if you break it." Orla's hand touched Kade's back, light and brief, and then she stepped around him to face Eleanor directly. "He sent you money for travel. I have the ticket receipt that proves the fare cost $70. You claimed he sent $300. Where is the rest of the money, Miss Whitmore?" Eleanor's face flushed. "I do not have to answer to you. You do if you want to threaten legal action," Orla said calmly. "Because if you claim a binding agreement based on money received, you will have to account for that money in court. And I suspect your uncle the judge will be very interested to learn that you took $230 under false pretenses and then abandoned the agreement entirely." There was a long silence. Kade stared at Orla, impressed and a little awed by her steady courage. Eleanor looked between them, calculating, and evidently decided the fight was not worth the risk. "Fine," she said tightly. "I will return the excess money, $230, and then we are done and you can ruin your reputation however you like." "That seems fair," Kade said. "Return the money you took fraudulently, and we will consider all agreements null and void." Eleanor produced a bank draft from her bag with sharp, angry movements, thrust it at Kade, and stalked back to her wagon. They watched her drive away in a cloud of dust, and only when she was out of sight did Kade let out a long breath. "That was well done," he said, turning to Orla. "The way you handled her, you were brilliant." Orla's hands were shaking slightly. "I was terrified. But I was not going to let her take this from us, not when we have worked so hard." "Us," Kade repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." Orla met his eyes, and he saw everything there: fear and hope and affection and the careful vulnerability of someone who had been hurt before but was willing to risk it again. "I love you," she said simply. "I did not plan to, and I know it complicates everything, but I do. I love you, and I love this place, and I want to stay not because I have nowhere else to go but because this is where I want to be." Kade's heart felt like it might burst. "I love you too. I have been trying to find the right moment to say it, the right words, but there is no perfect moment. There is just this. You walked off a train expecting nothing, and you gave me everything. You brought life back into this house and hope back into my days, and I cannot imagine this place without you and Tiaban anymore. I do not want to imagine it." "Then do not," Orla said, and she was smiling, tusks showing, eyes bright with unshed tears. "We are here, we are staying if you will have us." "If I will have you," Kade laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "Orla, will you marry me? Not because of some arrangement or because we both needed something from each other, but because I want to spend my life with you, building this place together, raising Tiaban together, facing whatever comes next together." "Yes," Orla said, and then she was in his arms and he was holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world because she was. They stood together on the porch as the autumn sun set over the prairie, and Kade felt something he had not felt in years: absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. They were married 3 weeks later in the parlor of the house, with a minister from town and a few neighbors who had come to respect the quiet orc woman who had transformed Kade Morrison's failing ranch into a working homestead again. Tiaban stood beside Orla in his carefully mended best clothes, solemn and proud, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, The boy cheered so loudly that everyone laughed. The money that Eleanor returned went into digging a deeper well and buying feed to get them through until spring. It was exactly what Kade had needed from the original arrangement, but it meant so much more now because Orla had fought for it, had stood up to threats and intimidation to protect what they were building together. Winter came, and with it more rain, the drought finally breaking in earnest. The prairie turned green again, the cattle regained their weight, and Kade began to believe that they would not just survive but thrive. He and Orla worked side by side every day, managing the ranch as true partners, making decisions together, building something that belonged to both of them equally. Tiabin flourished under their care, growing taller and more confident, losing his shyness and replacing it with the bold curiosity of a child who felt safe and loved. Kade taught him to ride, starting with a gentle old mare and graduating to a small pony that one of the neighbors sold them for a fair price. Watching Tiabin's face light up with joy the first time he sat in the saddle alone made Kade's chest tight with emotion. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the prairie, and the cattle bore healthy calves, the herd growing again after 2 years of decline. Kade and Orla stood at the fence line one evening, watching the new calves nurse and play, and he slipped his arm around her waist. "We did it," he said quietly. "We saved this place." "We did it together," Orla corrected, leaning into him. "That is what made it possible. The branding season came, hard work that required every bit of focus and effort they could muster. Kade hired on 2 temporary hands from town, young men who worked hard and did not make an issue of the orc woman who ran the household, and worked alongside them in the corrals when needed. They branded calves and repaired fences and moved the herd to fresh pasture, and by the time it was done, Kade's back ached and his hands were raw, but the satisfaction was immense. On the last day of branding, Tiabin begged to be allowed to help. He was still small, barely 4 years old, but Kade lifted him onto the gentlest horse and led him in a slow circle around the yard. The boy's face was incandescent with joy, his small hands gripping the saddle horn, his legs barely reaching halfway down the horse's sides. Orla watched from the porch, and when Kade caught her eye, she was smiling so brightly that it made everything they had been through worthwhile. This was what they had fought for, this moment of peace and accomplishment, this feeling of family, this sense of having built something lasting. That evening they sat together on the porch, Tiabin asleep inside after his big adventure, watching the stars come out over the prairie. The air smelled like rain and new grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "I have been thinking," Orla said, her hand resting on her stomach in a gesture that Kade had noticed becoming more frequent lately, "that Tiabin might like a sibling, someone to grow up with, to share this place with." Kade's heart skipped a beat. "Are you saying?" "I am saying that I am fairly certain," Orla said, turning to look at him with eyes that sparkled with happiness and just a touch of nervousness. "It is early yet, but I think by winter we will have a daughter or son to add to our family." Kade pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple, overwhelmed with emotion. "That is wonderful. That is perfect. Another child, another piece of the life we are building together." They sat in comfortable silence, and Kade thought about the day he had stood on that train platform waiting for a woman he had never met, about the orc woman who had stepped off carrying a child instead, about all the ways that things had not gone according to plan, and yet had worked out better than anything he could have imagined. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Eleanor had actually come?" Orla asked softly. "No," Kade said honestly. "I do not wonder about that at all, because I cannot imagine any version of my life better than this one. You and Tiabin, This ranch coming back to life, the family we are building. This is what I was supposed to have all along. I just did not know it until you stepped off that train." Orla turned in his arms and kissed him, slow and sweet, and Kade tasted salt on her lips and realized she was crying. But they were good tears, happy tears, the kind that come when something precious and hard-won finally feels secure. The stars wheeled overhead, vast and eternal, and in the house behind them a child slept safe and warm, and beneath Orla's heart another child grew, and the cattle grazed in green pastures, and the well was full, and the ranch that had nearly died was alive again with purpose and hope. Kade Morrison had waited for a bride who never came, and instead he had received something infinitely better. A wife who chose him, a son who trusted him, and a life built not on arrangements and contracts but on love and partnership, and the quiet courage of two people who refused to give up on each other or themselves. The prairie wind blew soft and steady, carrying the scent of rain and growing things, and Kade held his wife close and knew that he was the luckiest man alive. Not because everything had gone according to plan, but because when the plan fell apart, he had been wise enough and brave enough to embrace what arrived instead. And what arrived had been everything he never knew he needed.